At 5:45 in the morning, on the 16th of May, 1968, a woman named Ivy Hodge walked into her kitchen to make a cup of tea. She lived on the 18th floor of a brand new tower block in East London. The building was 2 months old. It still smelled of fresh paint and new concrete. From her window, 50 meters up, she could see the docks, the river, the gray London dawn. She was 56 years old, and she had struck a match to light her gas stove tens of thousands of times in her life. She struck it once more. The explosion that followed was not, by the standards of explosions, a large one. It did not break Ivy Hodge's eardrums. It barely singed her. Investigators would later note that items sitting on her kitchen shelves were undamaged. She was knocked to the floor, dazed, alive. But when Ivy Hodge got up, her kitchen wall was gone, and so was the corner of the building. The blast had blown out a single load-bearing wall, one concrete panel. And that one panel was holding up the 4 flats stacked directly above her. With nothing beneath them, those flats fell. Their weight crashed onto the floor below, and that floor gave way, and its weight fell onto the next, and the next, and the next. An entire corner of a 22-story tower peeling away and dropping to the ground, floor by floor, all the way down. Witnesses said it went like a house of cards. It took a few seconds. 4 people were dead, and the tower had been open for just 8 weeks. Here's the part that should stop you. What happened at Ronan Point that morning was not a freak accident. A gas leak was the trigger, but the collapse was built into the design. The people who put up these towers, in their thousands across Britain, would have known. And when the inquiry was over and the dead were buried, they rebuilt the corner, moved new families in, and let them live there for the next 16 years. This is the story of the tower that everyone was told would fall. To understand how a 2-month-old building could collapse from a cup of tea, you have to go back to what Britain was trying to do in the 1960s. After the Second World War, London had a housing crisis of staggering scale. German bombing had destroyed vast swathes of the city. The population was booming, and hundreds of thousands of families were living in slums, in crumbling Victorian terraces, on endless waiting lists. The government needed homes, enormous numbers of them, fast and cheap. And the answer, everyone agreed, was to build upward. Towers, streets in the sky. A clean, modern, futuristic escape from the grimy old city. The problem was speed. Building tower blocks the traditional way, brick by brick, floor by floor, took too long. So Britain imported a shortcut, a system developed in Denmark called large panel system building. Instead of constructing a tower on site, you cast the walls and floors as giant slabs of concrete in a factory, trucked them to the site, and simply bolted them together like a colossal set of building blocks. Stack the panels, bolt the joints, and a tower could go up in a fraction of the time. Ronan Point was built this way, one of 9 identical towers planned for the estate. It was thrown up in about 2 years by a major contractor and named after a local councillor. On paper, it was a triumph of modern efficiency. 22 stories, over 200 flats, affordable homes for hundreds of working families, all for £500,000. But the system had a hidden flaw, and it was a fatal one. In this kind of building, every panel holds up the one above it. There was no steel frame underneath doing the real work. The walls themselves were the structure, which meant there was no backup. No alternative path for the weight to travel if a single panel failed. Knock out one load-bearing wall, and everything above it has nowhere to go but down. Engineers have a phrase for this. They call it progressive collapse. The building had no way to fail small. And there was worse. When investigators later pulled the joints apart, they would find how those crucial connections had actually been made. The government moved fast. Prime Minister Harold Wilson set up an official inquiry within days, led by a senior lawyer, and its report landed just months later. Its central finding was blunt, and it did not hide behind the gas explosion. The collapse of part of the building, the tribunal concluded, was inherent in its design. U-tube. In other words, the gas leak was almost incidental. The inquiry found that the same corner could have been brought down by a strong enough wind. The building had been designed to old codes that badly underestimated the wind loads at that height. A serious fire could have twisted the joints and done the same thing. The explosion in Ivy Hodge's kitchen just happened to be what pulled the trigger first. If it hadn't been the match, sooner or later it would have been something else. Now, a normal country, receiving that finding about a brand new building, might have done one of two things: torn it down, or at the very least, admitted that the whole approach was dangerous and stopped. Instead, what happened next is the reason this is a long, silent story and not just an engineering one. They patched it. The authorities brought in interim safety measures, strengthening the joints with steel angles, removing the gas supply so no one could trigger another explosion, converting the flats to all electric. The destroyed corner of Ronan Point was rebuilt, and new tenants were moved in to live in it. Most of the original residents refused to come back. Of the families evacuated after the collapse, reportedly only one returned. The others were, in the words of the record, left very lonely and very scared. But the building filled up again with new people. People who needed a home and were told this one was now safe. One man did not believe it, and he would spend the next 18 years being proven right. His name was Sam Webb. He was a young architect, and even before Ronan Point collapsed, he had been uneasy about how these large panel towers were being built. After the disaster, he studied the building obsessively, and he came to a chilling conclusion. The repairs, he argued, had not fixed the real problem. The structure was still fundamentally unsound, and he made a specific and haunting prediction that the building would eventually fail on its own, from its own structural defects, in around 15 years, with or without a gas explosion. For years, Webb campaigned. He lobbied, he lectured, he pushed. And for years, he was treated as a nuisance, an alarmist standing in the way of a housing solution the country had already committed to. People were living in the tower the whole time. Then, in 1984, 16 years after the collapse, cracks appeared in the walls. An investigation found that the building had begun to lean, tilting to one side by more than a centimeter. It was almost exactly what the original investigators and Webb had feared. The council finally evacuated Ronan Point. And in 1986, they made a decision they should perhaps have made in 1968. They tore it down. But they did it in an unusual way. Instead of dropping it with explosives, they took it apart slowly, piece by piece, panel by panel, so that engineers could finally see, with their own eyes, how it had really been built. It became one of the most closely examined demolitions in history. And what they found inside the joints of that tower, where hundreds of people had been sleeping for 18 years, was worse than almost anyone had imagined. The connections were the whole point of this kind of building. The bolts and the concrete-filled joints were what held slab to wall, what stood between a family and a 50-meter drop. And when they opened them up, they found the truth. Most of the mechanical connections between the floor slabs and the walls had never been properly attached in the first place. Bolts that were supposed to be there were simply missing, and the joints that were meant to be packed solid with concrete were instead found stuffed with rubbish and old newspaper. YouTube. Read that again. The gaps that were supposed to hold the building together, filled with newspaper. For 18 years, families had lived stacked 22 stories high, and the thing keeping their floors from falling was, in places, quite literally garbage. The defects were so severe that investigators concluded the tower had been living on borrowed time all along. It was later assessed that the Great Storm of 1987, which struck barely a year after the demolition, would very likely have generated enough force to bring the building down on its own. They had taken it apart with almost no time to spare. Had Sam Webb lost his 18-year argument, the storm might have finished it, with everyone still inside. The rubble was sold back to the company that had built the tower. Some of it, in a final grim irony, was used to help build the runway at London City Airport. A piece of it sits in a museum today. Ronan Point changed the law. Building codes across Britain, and eventually much of the world, were rewritten to demand that a structure must never suffer collapse disproportionate to the cause. that knocking out one part can never bring down the whole. Thousands of buildings are safer because 4 people died in Canning Town in 1968. But the deeper lesson was one the authorities had tried very hard not to learn out loud. That the disaster wasn't really about a match or a faulty gas fitting. It was about what happens when you build too fast, too cheap, and then, when the evidence of danger is sitting right in front of you, you patch over it, move families back in, and hope no one asks what's inside the walls. Nearly 50 years later, in the same city, another tower would burn, and another inquiry would find, in the words of the architect who spent his life on Ronan Point, painful parallels to the defects he had exposed in 1986. The lessons had been written in concrete and newspaper. They had simply been buried again. If they buried this, what else did they bury?